The portion that we just read in Mark is a piece of apocalyptic literature. Now, apocalyptic, according to Fred Craddock in Preaching Throughout the Christian Year B, is, quote, an unveiling, a revealing, a vision that grants its recipients glimpse beyond what is going on to what is really going on. Apocalyptic literature generally speaks of end times and birth pangs. In this passage in Mark, Jesus talks about nation against nation, earthquakes and famines. Apocalyptic literature is the hardest pieces in the Bible for us to understand. Generally, it's in Daniel, this portion in Mark, and Revelations. So I looked up, what do people think about end times in various faiths? And this is from Wikipedia. The Abrahamic faiths maintain a linear cosmology with end time scenarios containing themes of transformation and redemption. In Judaism, the term end of days makes reference to the Messianic age and includes an ingathering of all the exiled Jewish diaspora, which means separation, going out in all different places. Some sects of Christianity depict the end time as a period of tribulation that precedes the second coming of Christ, who will face the Antichrist along with his power structure and usher in the kingdom of God. This is probably the one you're most familiar with. But in Islam, the Day of Judgment is preceded by the appearance of the Al-Masih ad-Dajjal and followed by the ascending of Isa, who is Jesus. Isa will triumph over the false Messiah or the Antichrist, which will lead to a sequence of events that will end with the sun rising from the west and the beginning of Qiyamah, which is the judgment day. Did you know that Islam was part of the Abrahamic faiths? Did you know that? It is. That they believe in the Hebrew Bible. And that they believe not that Jesus was the Messiah, but that Jesus was an incredible prophet who taught people how to live. Now, we humans are anxious to predict what's going to come, right? We want to know what's happening. And when we hear of these end times things, we look at what's going on in the world and we say, oh my gosh, what's happening? So you have out there a whole sect of preppers and survivalists. There are websites that we are approaching the end. And you need to gather all your food and get into your bomb shelters. That will be familiar to many of you. And store a cache of weapons because man will be against man and it will be the survival of the fittest. Cults, on the other hand, feed on fears. Jim Jones, there was a wonderful documentary recently on that. David Koresh. I'm sure you can name others. And I'm sure that many of you have wondered about these issues in your lives. I want you to ask yourself, do we need to worry about the end times? Or is the more relevant question, how are you living now? Are you focused on fear? Are you worried that with all that's going on in our nation and the fires and the earthquakes and the floods and the hatred and all of that, that we're approaching those end times? Are you afraid of suffering? Most people are not as afraid of dying as they are of the process of suffering prior to dying? Are you afraid of death? Are you so afraid in your life that you forget to live? There was a time in my life when poetry came pretty quickly to me and easily. And when it came, it was like a flood. It really was. It would just start in my head and it would keep going and going and going. And I'm going to share a poem that I wrote. I can tell you exactly where I was. I was in Rhode Island. It was a Friday afternoon. I had left work and I was driving home on Route 6. Some of you know that, some of you don't. It's Hartford Pike. And all of a sudden in my brain, I had, if I should die tomorrow, how would I live this day? And it just was coming and coming and coming. And I finally got home to my computer and I just went straight to the computer. And this is what I wrote. I wasn't trying to be morbid. I was trying to think about my life. And I think when we think of end times, this is an important concept for us. If I should die tomorrow, how would I live this day? With an appreciative eye, a listening heart, would God's way be my way? If I should die tomorrow, would my conscience be at rest, knowing that despite my mistakes, I consistently tried my best? If I should die tomorrow, what wisdom would I impart? Wisdom of truth and hope and light, of a pure, discerning heart? Or would this day be merely filled with worldly things, scurrying from task to task, never hearing birds as they sing? If I should die tomorrow, I pray my life would be the gift of gentleness and love that God has given me. I wrote that on February 5th, 1999. 17 days later, I got a hysterical call from my sister-in-law because my 3-year-old nephew and his 5-year-old daughter had died in a car accident. I read that at their funeral because life is that fragile. And we can worry as much as we want about the end times, but I was driving, again on Route 6, only on the freeway part of it, going to get my hair cut and ended up with a concussion for 3 years. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. What matters is how we live the time we have and this day. Every day is precious. We have a lot of portents right now, or signs of the end times. Global warming is one of them. The fires, the floods, the earthquakes. The tribalism that's going on. The increasing hate that we hear, and the anti-Semitism. The fact that people will go into clubs and schools with shotguns. It's scary. But can you change all that? Maybe. Maybe as a group you could change that. Maybe in your prayers you could change that. Maybe in your lives and your daily lives by changing yourself and by opening your hearts to those in our community who are hurting, who are poor, who are homeless, who are drug addicted and mentally ill, who just feel like they don't belong anywhere. Maybe you can make a difference there. The end times apocalyptic literature calls for us to remind us how to live each day of our lives. You know, you look up at me like I'm the minister here. Well, I am. You give me that authority. But the reality is that each one of you are ministers. You've been gifted by God. Martin Luther coined the phrase, the priesthood of all believers. You are priests. You are ministers. You are called to bring the love and healing of Jesus to our world. And you are called to behave in a way of integrity, compassion, and kindness. So when you wake up each morning, say, how can I gift the world today? How can God gift the world today through me? Because there's no guaranteeing that a tomorrow will come for any of us. A lot of you have been shocked this year with illnesses that you didn't expect. Car accidents that maim people. We never know. But ask God. Give your life to God every morning and see what happens. Because I bet you won't be as cranky. I bet you won't be as hurried. I bet you will look at the eyes of a child. That you will hold the hand of a loved one or an older person. That you will be different. And if you are different because of God's action in your life, then this community will be different. And if this community is different, then the people in it will be different. Your lives matter. Live each day as if you might not have a tomorrow. Amen.